everyone. Welcome to the webinar 7 Recommendations for Gaining Positive ROI and Strategic Benefits from Supply Chain Management. My name is CJ Whalage. I'm the Vice President of High-Tech Solutions at Kinaxis. And before we kick off and do our introductions, I'll take care of what I call logistics information. We'd ask that everyone on the attendees stay on mute if you can throughout the course of the presentation. In the lower right corner of your screen, you should see a Q&A box. Inside that Q&A box, feel free to submit questions along the way. There is a section at the end where we'll queue up those questions and get to as many as we can. So as you go through, feel free to add those Q&As into the box. And with that, I'd like to introduce our guest speaker as Frank Scavo. Frank is the Principal Analyst at Constellation Research Group. As well, he is the President of Computer Economics, which is an IT research and advisory firm. Frank comes to us with a tremendous amount of experience in the industry across many businesses, including discrete process manufacturing, medical devices, pharmaceuticals, wholesale distribution, retail, and information services. Frank is APIC's Certified Fellow in Production and Inventory Management, as well as APIC Certified in Integrated Resource Management. And we're very pleased to have Frank today to speak through and be our guest presenter on the research of 7 recommendations for gaining positive ROI. And with that, I'll pass it over to Frank Scavo.
CJ, thanks very much. Okay, so as CJ mentioned, we'll take Q&A at the end. There is a box you'll see here on the lower right of your screen. I'm going to actually put this in full screen mode, so you might want to write your questions down, and I'll bring that back when we get to the end of my presentation, and during CJ's closing remarks, you can enter your questions, and we'll be happy to answer those. So as CJ mentioned, my name is Frank Scavo, and I'm Principal Analyst at Constellation Research. And you also notice here that I'm also the President of Computer Economics, and that's important because the research that I'm going to present to you today, we did for Constellation Research, but it's based upon survey information that I gathered through my work at Computer Economics. So you're going to see quite a bit of a kind of market trend and adoption scenarios that we're going to go through here. And I hope that you find that interesting. I was also one of the first tech bloggers at the Enterprise Systems Spectator. So after the presentation, if you want to visit my blog, I've been doing this since 2002, and I cover many areas of enterprise systems, including supply chain. So that's the link there. And then finally, my perspective in all of these topics is really as an advocate for IT buyers. So I help companies select new applications, define their requirements, develop IT strategy. So the perspective I bring here is really, from the buyer's perspective. So with that, let me just mention some of the things that I'm planning to cover today. Through the statistics, I'm going to present some of the hot spots for supply chain investment and specifically why it's becoming more attractive for smaller companies. And then, as the title indicates, we're going to talk about practical implementation strategies and recommendations that will help you maximize the benefits while mitigating the risks, including where you would start, and then also one prerequisite that many people think of that they need for supply chain that really is not a prerequisite. So I hope you find that interesting. So first of all, just kind of to level set, what do we mean by supply chain management? Well, the classic definition is that supply chain systems facilitate the planning, the movement, and the storage of materials from procurement through production to the final distribution to end customers. So it's really a very comprehensive definition. And when we look at, comparing ERP to supply chain, you see kind of a difference in emphasis. ERP really is focused on the internal operations of your business, whereas supply chain, by definition, has to look both internally on how you, plan, move, and store materials internally, but it also has to look outwardly to suppliers, to customers, and increasingly in this day and age, to subcontractors. So you're going to see this definition, the fact that supply chain has an outward focus in addition to an internal focus, leads to some very interesting considerations when we go to implement these systems. So keep that in mind. ERP is a kind of internally focused set of applications, while supply chain is focused outwardly as well as inwardly. So we look at what's driving investment in supply chain these days. We're going to talk about what the investment levels are, but what's driving it? Well, increasingly companies are dealing with global markets. And all of these factors have always been true for the large Global 1000, but we see more and more that these factors are moving down and affecting even small companies, small and mid-sized organizations, which some of you on this call may be from smaller companies. So I'm sure you would all agree that that you're dealing now with serving customers in many international markets. Competing on speed and service, not just cost. So it's not enough many times today to be the low-cost provider, but you have to get product to your customers in a faster way and with a higher level of service and order fill rates. You're competing on lead time, right? The supplier that can deliver in the shortest time is going to have an advantage because the buyers are now also competing on lead time. So being in a position where you're supplying not just more cheaply but more quickly is a competitive advantage. And then, as we all know, energy costs are increasing, so transportation costs are increasing, which means we have to optimize the cost of moving materials, again, over a global supply chain. So the increasing transportation costs means we need to do a better job of optimizing our supply and delivery of materials. And then the supply chains themselves are becoming increasingly complex, including the use of subcontractors. Whereas companies used to manufacture many of their components and sub-assemblies in-house, we see more and more that they are subcontracting much of that work, and in some cases subcontracting even the entire manufacture of the product. And again, that's moving down to small and mid-sized organizations. I've been working with companies over the past 2 years, under $100 million that have significant contract manufacturing operations overseas. So that adds increasing complexity because you don't have control over those operations of those contractors, yet you need that information in order to meet your delivery promises. So this is driving increased interest in supply chain systems. So what are the benefits? Well, unlike many technology initiatives that have what I call soft benefits, things like improving management visibility or improving employee satisfaction. What I like about supply chain is that it really is one of the technology initiatives that really has hard bottom line benefits. So we're not talking about, things like generally increasing customer satisfaction or generally increasing productivity. We're talking about things like lowering inventory levels, or improving on-time delivery, faster customer lead time. Toward the bottom, better utilization of warehouse and transportation assets, reduction in working capital. So when you go to a CFO and you're bringing these types of benefits to the table for the business case, it's very easy for an executive to see what the payback is on supply chain. So I like supply chain projects because they do have these kind of hard benefits that I think resonate well with business decision makers these days. All right, so now we're going to get into some of the adoption and investment statistics. So you can see where the market's going and where other companies like yours are implementing these solutions. So this is based, as I mentioned earlier, upon our data computer economics. Specifically, we have a study called the Technology Trends Study based on a survey that we survey worldwide for 14 new and popular technologies. Many of them carry over from year to year, but some we introduce some new ones and drop some old ones every year. And we track the trends in adoption rates, investment rates, ROI and TCO, and other customer experience with the technologies. So our website, www.computereconomics.com, you can read more about that study. That's available, as well as the study that we published upon which this webinar is based. That's also available on our website. So the first thing is, when we talk about supply chain, the first thing we ask the survey respondents is specifically what functionality within supply chain are you planning to implement with the investment dollars that you've allocated. So of those companies that are saying they're going to invest in supply chain over the next 18 months, what specifically are they implementing or investing in? So you can see that, again, unlike many other technology initiatives, there's a broad variety of applications when we talk about supply chain. The most frequently named function is warehouse management. 70% of the people that are investing in supply chain are investing in warehouse management. So, and that's understandable because that's something that really all companies, that manufacture, produce goods, products, physical goods, have to manage their warehouse space. So it's a very tactical type of investment. It's really an supply chain execution function. But the next three are really gets more to the heart, I feel, of the strategic benefits of supply chain, and that is the supply chain planning side. So you have things like supply chain visibility and analytics. 51% of the respondents that are investing in supply chain name that as a function they're investing in. Advanced planning, inventory optimization, and sales and operations planning, which is a very high-level type of planning, as you know, that you can do to balance supply, demand, and production and inventory. And then supplier relationship management, and then it falls off into more what I would call more tactical or kind of niche applications. So you can see, again, supply chain, we talk about supply chain, it really is a very broad variety of applications. And what you implement depends on really what your driving needs are. So let's look at the adoption rate and the investment rate. So we have what we call a technology maturity analysis. And the vertical axis is the percentage of companies that are currently making investments in that technology versus the horizontal axis, which is the percentage of respondents that have that technology in place. They have adopted it. So you have the adoption rate from left to right, you have the investment rate from bottom to top. So technologies in the upper right are technologies that they're highly adopted by a lot of companies, and a lot of companies are currently investing in them. So let's look what that is. Well, number one is ERP, and that makes total sense, right? A lot of companies have ERP, and at any point in time, a lot of them are making additional investments in that technology. So we looked down at, so where is supply chain? You can see the 14 technologies that we surveyed this year, and supply chain is number 11, and it falls down in the lower, almost in the lower left quadrant, right, which is the low investment, low adoption. Well, that's because this chart is showing it in terms of all sectors, not just manufacturing and distribution companies. When I pull out everybody except manufacturers and distribution companies and put those, plot them, that ball moves almost to the upper right. So in other words, I expect that most of you on this webinar today are from companies that either make things or distribute things. You can see that supply chain is a very popular technology, both in terms of how well it's been adopted, as well as how companies are making investments. And that's for all the reasons that I just mentioned on the previous slides about the drivers and also the hard financial benefits. So among, like it says in the title, among manufacturing and distribution, supply chain has high adoption and high investment rates. So let's look at it over time. So the survey was done last year, comparing to the one we did the previous year, and this is over all sectors, not just manufacturing and distribution. We can see that the current adoption rate has grown. We've added 3%. So 30% of all companies have supply chain management solutions in place, and the investment rate has increased by 1 point. So the adoption and the investment rates continue to grow. If we were to look at manufacturing and distribution companies, these numbers would be, the adoption is more in the 50% range, as I said, and the investment rate, I think, is more like 30%. So now let's look at it by size of organization. So historically, as this chart indicates, large companies have been higher adopters of supply chain. You can see that this is 46% of companies have adopted supply chain among large companies, dropping to 20% of small companies. But what I find interesting here is that the investment rate does not fall off as greatly, right? So you have 24% of large companies are investing in supply chain versus 13 and 13 for small and mid-size. But you can see that that is not as much of a fall off as adoption. So if you can follow my logic here, historically, larger companies have invested at a higher rate than smaller companies in terms of supply chain, and that's still true, but not as much as it used to be. So in my view, this kind of shows that small and mid-sized companies are beginning to catch up to larger firms in their interest in these solutions. Again, for all the reasons that as I just said. So then we do another analysis and we say, well, what about the risk and the reward of supply chain versus other types of technologies? And in this case, we plot on the vertical axis what we call the cost success. And by that we mean when we ask them about the cost of implementing this technology, did the project come in greater than budget, less than budget, or about the same as budget? In other words, what was the risk of exceeding your budget for this technology? In other words, how predictable was the cost? Right? We're not saying whether it was high cost or low cost. We're saying is how well did you stay within your budgetary estimates for that technology? And we plot, that's the vertical axis. Then we plot that against the horizontal axis, which is what we call the ROI success. Did this project achieve return on investment within 2 years? Was it great? Was it greater than expected, less than expected, or about the same? So you have in the upper right, these are technologies that have low risk and high reward. They stay within their budgets and they also have high payback within 2 years. So number 1 and 2 and 3 is things like infrastructure as a service, platform as a service, tablet computers, 5 and 6, software as a service, data warehouse, BI. Supply chain management comes down here at number 9, has a fairly high reward. So again, the ROI is strong for supply chain management, but there is a risk of exceeding the budget. That's what this chart is telling you here. So that's going to lead us to some of the recommendations we're going to talk about in a little bit about how to manage those cost expectations. We're also going to talk about the implications of some of the other things on this chart here too. So this is a good chart to on slide 12 here to keep in mind. So let's drill down a little bit more about the ROI and the TCO, total cost of ownership. So the ROI experience after 2 years for companies that have implemented the technology, 35% of them have a positive ROI after 2 years. 54% of them break even. Only 11% have a negative ROI in 2 years. And that, compared to the other technologies, is actually quite strong. Some of the technologies like ERP and a couple others get into the 30% negative ROI category. On the TCO experience, again, as we indicated, supply chain does have a tendency to exceed budget, right? So 24% of the respondents reported that their total cost was greater than what they had budgeted. Only 7% came in less than budget, and about 70% came in about the same of budget. So again, ROI is strong, TCO needs to be managed. That's the message to take away from this slide. Then we asked companies, how much are you spending on supply chain solutions? And here we compare companies that are making their first investment in supply chain with those that have supply chain solutions in place and are making additional investments. And you notice at the median, the number is nearly the same, $2,859 for the first-time investors in supply chain versus $3,000 for follow-on investors. And what that tells me is that unlike some other technologies which you implement and then you make small incremental additions to it, supply chain tends to be the type of technology that you make a series of investments to build out your capabilities in a phased way. And if you think about it, that slide earlier that talked about all the variety of applications that come under the banner of supply chain, that really makes a lot of sense. So a company might start with sales and operations management, which, by the way, I think is a good place to start. Sales and operations planning, may do some warehouse management and may incrementally add additional functionality to their supply chain investments over the years. So that's why you see that companies tend to spend a moderate amount per user, and this is a per user number. I don't think I said that here. This is a per user number, $3,000 per user. So they tend to make a series of investments there. All right, so that kind of gives you a picture of where companies are currently in terms of adoption and investment levels for supply chain management. So let's go on and talk about how do you make this practical. So we have 7 recommendations for gaining the return on investment, also managing the total cost risk that we talked about, and gaining those strategic benefits from supply chain. So we have 7 recommendations. I'm going to go over each of these in turn very quickly, and then we'll take your questions. So the first one is to align your supply chain program objectives with your business strategy. Because supply chain has such a strong set of hard benefits, and it's so much aligned strategically with the interests of the business, it becomes really important to look at what you're trying to optimize. So are you an organization that's competing on cost primarily? Are you the low-cost provider? If you are, you're going to design your supply chain solution to optimize cost. Are you an organization that says, we're not primarily concerned about cost, but we are concerned about being the fastest to deliver? Then you're going to optimize your supply chain solution to closely manage lead times and reduce lead times overall. Are we competing on service? We want to be always in stock. We want to never or very seldom have to tell a customer, no, we can't fill that order. Then you're going to optimize your supply chain solution to maximize order fill rates. So supply chain is not an infrastructure project. It's a strategic project, which means you've got to align it with the needs of the business. So this means executive management needs to get involved, especially at the front end, to say what problem are we trying to solve and what are we trying to achieve with this solution. So that's the first recommendation. Second, as we just talked about, you should plan your supply chain investment as a series of investments rather than one major project. So you don't want to eat the elephant all in one bite. You want to take a bite at a time. Best if you can break those down into more bite-sized projects, which I would view as 3 to 6 months at max. 3 months is better. 6 months, at the most. As we all know, ERP projects, first phase deliverables can sometimes take a year or more, 18 months. There's no need to do that with supply chain. You need to get in, achieve those benefits, establish some measure of success, and then move on to the next achievement. And so then, like I said at the beginning, where do you start? Well, the best place to start is with the customer, as with many things. Start with the customer, right? So start with customer demand and get a good handle on things like demand forecasting, closer collaboration with customer production schedules, or if you're a supplier to retail, there's point of sales information. If you get a good statement of customer demand, it's going to make everything upstream from that work a lot more smoothly. So when companies ask me where do we start, I say start with the customer. Start with forecasting. Start with sales planning. Start with sales and operations planning. Things at the front end that are going to make your job a lot easier for planning at lower levels and back to suppliers. So I think that's a good place to start. Third recommendation is to not make ERP consolidation a prerequisite for supply chain. So I can't tell you how many times I have heard customers tell me that they would love to implement a supply chain solution, but they've got a problem. They have 2 or 3 or 4 ERP systems. They've got multiple instances, or they've got even different systems in different parts of the world. It's because they made acquisitions, or they have plant-level solutions. They have a different corporate system. And they think that they need to consolidate ERP in order to have a single source of the truth, common expression that's used, to drive supply chain. Well, remember at the beginning we said that supply chain looks outwardly to customers and suppliers. So in practice, your ERP system is only one source of data for supply chain. And in fact, you've got, ideally, a good supply chain planning system is going to take information from suppliers. It's going to take also information from customers. In the world where we're increasing the use of subcontract manufacturing, you're going to need information from your subcontractors. And guess what? None of those guys are running on your ERP system. So you've already got multiple sources of data to begin with. If you've got two ERP systems, well, that's just, two ERP systems. But you've got all this other information you need to take in as well. In addition, probably some of the information you need, even within your own organization, is not in your ERP system. You've got, probably you don't even know how many Excel workbooks or Access databases, FileMaker Pro, faxes, email correspondence that really contains information that you need in your supply chain system. So you're already dealing with multiple sources of data. So why do you look at consolidating ERP as a prerequisite? I think it's better to implement a good supply chain, especially supply chain planning system that is good at integrating multiple sources of data. Then if you want to continue to do ERP consolidation for other reasons, and there's a lot of reasons you want to do that anyway, go ahead and do that, but don't make it a prerequisite for ERP. I just think that's putting an unnecessary obstacle toward achieving very tangible benefits that are needed by the business. Okay, then in selecting supply chain solutions, who do you go to? Well, there is a very wide variety of providers. Almost too many to count. It's a very highly fragmented market, so and it's too much to go through who they all are in this webinar. But basically, I divide them into four major categories. You have your large application suite providers. We all know who those are. There's really just about 2 or 3 of those in the world that provide a broad variety of business applications, everything from ERP to human resources to CRM, supply chain, business intelligence. And you can buy, if you've standardized on one of those large application suite providers, you can potentially look at them for at least evaluate or consider what they offer in terms of supply chain. And a lot of companies do that. In addition, there's a whole number of mid-tier providers as well, and some of them have good supply chain solutions. So that's another source. If you have standardized on a Tier 2 ERP product, you may look and see what they have in terms of supply chain. But remember what we said, that the sources of data for ERP, for supply chain, are not just your ERP system. Therefore, you may want to look at what we call the supply chain specialists. So these are companies that really only deal with supply chain solutions. They're not trying to boil the ocean or be a provider of every type of business application. They focus in a best-of-breed scenario on supply chain. So you look at those folks and see if they have solutions that will work well for the problem that you're trying to solve. So, and there's a whole number of those as well, depending on what specifically you're looking for. And then finally, excuse me, we have what we call the managed service providers. So these are folks like the 3PL, third-party logistics providers, and contract manufacturers that increasingly are wrapping value-added services into their contract manufacturing or third-party logistics offerings. So a couple of years ago, I worked with a large supplier to the metals, to a metal supplier to a large number of industries, and they were looking at wrapping in supply chain planning services as part of their offering to their customers. So remember earlier we said that companies are increasingly going to contract manufacturing and also third-party logistics to outsource that part of their business. It's possible that those providers may be a good source of supply chain systems, and they can take that on as well. So this is maybe a good choice for small and mid-sized businesses that don't want to implement their own systems but would choose to outsource that to a service provider. So there are some good solutions there as well. Number 5 when you're looking at bringing in a supply chain system, look at the SaaS providers. A good number of those folks that we talked about back here provide supply chain as software as a service or cloud application. So why is that useful? Well, if you look, it turns out on our technology trend study, we surveyed software as a service as a technology. And you notice that's in the low-risk, high-reward category. So supply chain is number 11 down here. If you take your supply chain system and you look at cloud deployment, that's going to tend to move it in the right direction. So here you have, the benefits of software as a service or cloud, as we know, faster implementation, easier integration with trading partners because they may already be integrated with that SaaS application. You have elastic computing, which means you can scale to high capacity computing at times when you need to do a massive, scenarios or simulation. And the vendor is taking care of the upgrades for you. So I think software as a service is particularly applicable in the supply chain world, as well as many other applications, because it does tend to deal with that total cost of ownership and that cost of budgetary risk that we talked about earlier. So think about a software as a service deployment option for your supply chain system. I think that's a real good approach. Sixth recommendation is to, don't forget the skills upgrade that's going to be needed. Supply chain is not a simple set of applications. So you need some training. Your users are going to need a skills upgrade. Fortunately, there are professional societies that provide certifications. I've listed some of them here if you're not familiar with them. Look at these folks: Institute for Supply Management, APICS, where I'm a member and certified, American Society of Transportation and Logistics, and so on. These are a very good source of, I would say, very cost-effective professional development courses that your folks can take to upgrade their skills. So it's not a matter of training on the software, which is, I view it as what key do I press, but it's really the concepts and the education behind the concepts and techniques of supply chain management that I think are really important for your users to, supply chain users to master as part of the implementation. So don't forget the skills upgrade. And then along with that, I think it's important when you're budgeting for supply chain, put in more money than you think you need for people and process change. Because supply chain is really much more than technology. It involves, in some cases, organizational change. You're going to have people reporting up in different parts of the organization than they do today. There may be some dotted line relationships that you're going to have to figure out. You're going to have to, of course, if you're going to do that, you're going to have to deal with people's resistance to change. You're going to need a strong communications program. You're going to need, as we said, a strong education and training program. You're going to potentially be changing business processes to take advantage of the capabilities of your supply chain system. So you have process redesign, and the whole thing needs a strong dose of project management. So as I say here on the bottom, put a business leader in charge. Don't make this an IT project. Put a leader in charge and make this really an organizational and a change management a project, and then you're going to have some real good success. So I am just about done here. You have my contact information here on this slide. You can reach me by phone, by email, a couple emails. You can find me on Twitter. And as I said earlier, visit my blog at the Enterprise Systems Spectator. And I hope we can continue to stay in touch. So I'm going to, I think this is what I had here. I'm going to turn this back to CJ. Before I do that, let me just mention I've opened up the webinar here. You see the Q&A panel on the lower right. So if you have questions, I see there's a few that have already come in. Go ahead and enter those, and we'll be happy to take those. But before we answer those, I'm going to turn this back to CJ, and he will continue with some closing remarks. So, CJ, thanks very much.
Great. Thanks, Frank. And if you could change the presenter over, that'd be great. But that was, I'd say that was fascinating information, Frank, and I'd say as an ex-AMR analyst who covered high tech, very, very interesting research, and I'd encourage everyone to get a copy of Frank's research report, the complete report, and read through. It's extremely interesting. And I kind of call out a couple things that Frank spoke in his research report, and it's really from a practitioner's standpoint. My time at Apple, at EMC, Bose, and Sony as a practitioner, I looked at this slide here, and the ROI I would agree with, but I was surprised with the adoption and the TCO success and even the investment success being very low. But then I kind of thought about it, and two things came up. The first one was what we call is the process of supply chain has really done what, in humorously say, is what Elvis has done, is left the building. The process evolution has gone out to contract manufacturers, to third-party logistics providers. Supply chain is much, much more complex. And I'd say last I checked, the ERP that I put in place, it's hard enough just to get it in my own building rather than put it in all these other nodes in the supply chain. So in a lot of ways, very, very understandable with the adoption rate is low, primarily because the supply chain process has gotten so complex and so global. I'd say the other thing that I found interesting was planning has taken on a different tone. And when you look at what's required of somebody who traditionally was a plan, buy, make, deliver, it's about collaboration, negotiation, about the relationship. And with this global set of complex nodes in the supply chain, it's becoming more and more critical to have that visibility and to have the extensive collaboration inside of your plan. And at Kinaxis, one of the things we like to show is traditionally people have put in these types of solutions in supply chain, and I think this is why the adoption rate is low, is functionally this is a good screen. If you have a demand issue, you put in a demand solution. If you have a collaboration issue, you put in a collaboration system. What traditionally happens then, and probably causes some of that low adoption, is that people put in things in place, what we call middleware. And I've done this throughout my career at Apple, at EMC. And when we talk about middleware, what we're kind of talking about is Excel. And when we see people put in that Excel, it becomes extremely difficult to adopt the solution because you're dealing with an issue that's not functionally, it's across end-to-end supply chain network. And what we find out is that legacy approach is just not enough. I talked about the functional excellence. There's been many companies, and I've been involved in these, where things are functionally very good, but it very much lacks that decision latency. Trying to get a decision across to your supply chain partners, to your suppliers, to your customers becomes very, very slow. When you have nightly batches between some of these functionally excellent systems, you need the speed within minutes or days, and it's just not there. The other thing I'd say, especially for smaller, mid-sized companies, my background's been in some of the larger companies, is that as things go global, it's difficult to scale. Excel is very good to start with, but it becomes extremely difficult when you start looking at global suppliers, global customers, and that scale is just not there. And what we find is the challenge truly isn't necessarily in just planning or just logistics. It's in end-to-end. And the mantra that we look at is really the challenge you're looking at is how do you know sooner and act faster? In this complex set of supply chain nodes, the challenge becomes how fast can you gather this information and what can you do with it? And the way we look at knowing sooner and acting faster primarily is 4 key capabilities. And I'd reach out to folks as a practitioner is, do you have real-time visibility? Are you gathering information, not just from your own 4 walls, but are you gathering things across your supply chain network? And then the question is, visibility isn't just it. The question becomes, what do you do with it? Are you doing things like multi-scenario simulation and integrated planning? When we look across that network, is things happen, whether it be a large happening like a flood or an earthquake, or whether it be a demand increase or a new product introduction. How are you using that to collaborate across this set of complex nodes and multiple partners, and how fast can you do it? And when I get to the other thing that I found Frank's research is tremendously interesting is the findings of where solutions are under consideration. When I look at the 4 things that Frank pointed out below warehouse management is those are true end-to-end challenges. The visibility, if you have a complex set of network, the visibility isn't just your four walls, it's back into your contract manufacturers, your suppliers, your second-tier suppliers, into your customers as well. The advanced planning, once again, you got the data, what are you going to do with it? And how do you do that kind of simulation? We find a tremendous amount of companies start with sales and operations planning and try to extend that to run a process that's end-to-end, as well as better supplier relationships. The interesting one was warehouse, I found, even though that's considered execution in some ways. When you kind of take a step back and say, what's in the warehouse? It's inventory. And the largest ROI that we've seen people get when they put in supply chain planning systems is a significant reduction of inventory. And when we do that, what we find out is the way they do that is to simulate that end-to-end. In a lot of cases, the inventory isn't yours or owned by you in some cases, but in the whole end-to-end process, that end-to-end margin becomes critical, and lowering the inventory footprint in this complex node by collapsing those planning cycles, responding to changes a lot faster, becomes a significant best-in-class process. And the way we do it here at Kinaxis, I'll throw you out, is we are what I'd say is functional system agnostic. We sit on top as a control tower you see in the middle. We sit on top of all these complex nodes. We pull up all that data, and we give end-to-end visibility. And our thing is we're selling speed. Across that end-to-end network, your nodes are complex. You need that information. But it gets back to the same question: is what do you do with it? And if you look at these circles here, a lot of customers we have start with sales and operations planning. They take this end-to-end data or visibility, and they enhance it by using sales and operations planning process, reducing those cycle times, getting that speed. We've had other customers that go straight at order promise management or look at inventory and supply management. The key point here is, regardless of the process or where you start, is gathering that information in a control tower format, having visibility to it in near real time, and then using it inside of one of these processes in your supply chain process to make that advancement. And we kind of talked about, real quick, is the collaborative nature. Planning has truly changed. My 23 years, I look back, is the days of buying a product or the days of setting a safety stock inside of a system are kind of gone. It becomes now about the collaborative nature of what you do with your information. And what we do in Kinaxis is obviously give folks that visibility on a dashboard or mobility, but what they do with it is build simulations or scenarios, a demand change or supply change, a new product introduction. They try and take that information and run a scenario. In a lot of cases, when you're running scenarios, somebody along the way is going to say no, and you have to rerun the scenario. So the speed at which you do those analytics is critical. And then calling out, in a responsibility-based collaboration, calling out who is involved inside of this scenario, getting the decisions done. The scenarios are very easy to run. Getting people to agree and collaborate real quickly is critical, and that's where the responsibility collaboration is strongly needed. And these are the things that, as Kinaxis, as we offer, giving the visibility through a control tower, enabling it through a process, and giving folks the tools so that they can do these types of scenarios, these types of collaboration, to truly get the benefit of that end-to-end visibility. And we kind of throw out here, inside of our website, I think folks have visited some. There's some real interesting stories, and I point out here some of the benefits our customers have seen. Jabil specifically, over 4,000 people at Jabil using our system, running scenarios left and right. I'm sure somebody on this call has called Jabil and expected an answer within the day as far as a change to something they've done. They've done an 83% reduction in expedite orders. That is a significant percentage, especially considering the margins, the low margins that Jabil works with already. To reduce expedite orders means they're not losing margin. You look at Qualcomm, I'd encourage everybody to go on our website and take a look at some of the stuff that Qualcomm states. They can't take an order without using Kinaxis. And so on-time delivery, 98%. And then Amgen, I did say S&OP is a common starting point. Amgen has done 43% reduction in S&OP cycle time. That's significant, considering if you're doing it once a month, responding to demand changes, you can get this down to once a week. The ability to respond significantly improves your inventory as well as other supply chain benefits. And with that, I kind of pause and we'll do some Q&A. And I'm going to see if I can open up this screen a little bigger so I can read it. All right. Let's see how I can open it up there. So, Frank, if you're ready, I'm going to try and take a look. The first question is on measuring adoption. It's kind of a general thing, but how are you measuring adoption? You mentioned the rate's kind of low in supply chain, but how are you specifically measuring that adoption?
Right. So let me just emphasize that because we're measuring multiple technologies, we ask the same questions for all industries. So adoption and investment rates for supply chain appear to be lower than many other technologies, but that's because, for example, banks and insurance companies, don't have supply chain systems. They don't have materials they're moving. So it's really mostly a manufacturing, distribution, and to some extent retail. So when we look at just the manufacturing distribution, it's actually very high adoption and a strong investment rate. So let me just be sure that came across. So how do we measure it? Well, we asked our survey respondents, the first question we asked them is, concerning this technology, in this case supply chain management, are you considering the technology? Are you currently implementing the technology? Do you have the technology in place and you're not making any further investments, or do you have the technology in place and you are making further investments? So we ask them that way, and then of course, if they're none of the above, then there's no activity. So that gives us a pretty good idea of the number of companies that have the technology in place. That would be those that have it in place and aren't doing anything more in terms of investment, and those that are making further investments, as well as companies that are making further investments. So that's, we basically ask them directly, where they are, and then we calculate for the other statistics. We only look at those that are making investments. Hope that's clear.
Great. No, thank you, Frank. The next question, and I very much agree with the data type question, is access to some of the data and structure of that data. But did your research look into strategies about best practices on semi-structured, considering Excel and Access, semi-structured type data?
We didn't specifically, ask any questions around that. I would only comment from my own experience having consulted in this area that, generally there are more in the supply chain area, and there's a few other areas as well around customer service and so on. But in supply chain is one of those areas where you see I'd agree with whoever asked this question, you see an awful lot of Excel and Access use. And I think, CJ, you may have mentioned this, that generally when you see a lot of that going on, it really means there's gaps in the system capabilities. So people need to get their jobs done. God bless them. People are very inventive, and if you don't give them the tools to do the job, they'll build their own damn tools, right? So, they get the job done, sometimes with heroic measures and so on, but I would not look at that as a positive thing. So, yeah, if those files can be, structured in a better way, they can be, formalized, made part of the formal system, that's a good thing until they can be replaced by a system that has more robust and integrated capabilities. I think that's good to do. But I generally look for opportunities to, whatever that Excel or Access database is doing, to try to figure out what the objective is and roll that into the formal system. I think you're going to have better results there.
Okay, great. Thank you. I'm going to pull from the questions here. Frank, it's about the next question is about supply chain skills and talent and stuff. And having run some supply chains, I think it's definitely difficult to get the right. But the question is, with a lack of supply chain talent to hire, what are their options aside from training, which you point out, of current employees? What do you find companies can do to bring skill sets in, or at least address that lack of skill set?
Well, I think that's a very good question, because it's I don't think it's one thing or the other. I think it's one of those cases where you need to say, check all the boxes and say all of the above, right? So we are going to hire, if I'm looking at major improvement in my supply chain systems and I don't have adequate resources, adequate skills in this area, I would look at an all of the above approach. So first of all, I would hire I would hire one or two people that have those skills. I would use them to mentor my current employees, at the same time send those current employees, into certification programs, training, and education. I would also consider even hiring someone on a contract basis that maybe, isn't available, is not interested in joining my company, but hire a consultant, again, to mentor my folks internally. And then, the other thing that I mentioned here is this contract manufacturers and third-party logistics providers. Some companies just take the approach, we're going to outsource supply chain management as well, or at least parts of it. So if I'm, as I mentioned earlier, a major customer of metals, say I'm in the aerospace and defense industry, and I use a lot of specialty metals, rather than try to manage that supply chain, I'm going to take one of my key suppliers that offers supply chain services and make him that company a strategic supplier, and take advantage of their skills and expertise of their personnel, at least in that category of materials, to do that. So, again, if you take all of the approach to satisfy the people side of this, I think you'll have a better chance. But there is a shortage of people that have been trained and educated in this area. So I think it's something that industry has to be willing to make those investments to satisfy.
Okay, great. And Frank, the next one, it's a bit of a humorous question, but it gets at the ERPs and the risk and reward section. And it kind of goes at, where do folks go if they have an investment at ERP? It says when you're looking at your technology risk and reward, it's ERPs are in the low reward, high risk, which certainly is not a good thing considering the 3 to 6 month bucket stuff. But we need to focus on that smaller bucket implementation. Should ERPs even be put in the consideration of a supply chain management?
Well, I think a lot of companies would be happy if we didn't have to do ERP. That'd be great. But, there's a lot of things we do in life that we don't like to do or want to do, but we have to do. We have to eat our vegetables. ERP is one of those things that, gets a lot of criticism, and I think rightly. But I think it's because, the benefits of ERP are often not in ERP. They're in the things you do on top of ERP, including supply chain. So, on the one hand, I made the point here that you shouldn't let supply chain projects wait for ERP consolidation. But on the other hand, supply chain runs a lot better if you have a good transactional system sitting underneath it. So, it's one of those things that I almost look at ERP, even though it's a business application, almost look at it as part of the business infrastructure. So, it's hard to get excited sometimes about ERP, but it's one of those things that if you do it well, it makes a lot of other things a lot simpler. That said, even if you don't do it well, you can still, I think, make up for some of the deficiencies of your ERP system by being smart about how you implement supply chain. So I'm not sure if I'm making a lot of sense on that, but ERP has a low risk, high risk, and low reward because it is more of an infrastructure project, but you still need to do it. So I guess that's my view.
No, that's great. I'd add too, as an ex-practitioner, 3 to 6 months is a short time to do some kind of expectations. Hey, another question came in, Frank, on the data. And I think it's a good question because I've gone through this myself. Is it speaks to the lack of data or the master data that's within ERP. It said with a good many of our supply chain nodes, external. As well as their ERP data is not that clean, or even in Excel. Have you found in any research how companies deal with data that's not theirs, that's bad in ERP, or is in Excel and difficult to grab?
Right. Well, that's really getting at what I was trying to get at in the last question, which is that if ERP can do one thing for supply chain that it needs to do, is provide good master data, and I view that first and foremost as product data. So, and within product data, we're talking about item definition, product definition, engineering, in engineered, highly engineered products, good engineering information, and bills of material. So, as you saw, I've been APIX certified since 1981, and back in the late 70s and early 80s, when I was doing this for the first time, we harped on the issue of bill of material accuracy. And guess what? It's now the next century, and we're still talking about bill of material accuracy. So if you don't have good bills of material in your systems, supply chain really can't invent that information. It's got to get it from somewhere. So if you're considering a supply chain planning solution, I would say the minute you're starting to look at vendors to provide that, I would launch a side project to clean up your data in your ERP system so that supply chain has some good product data to draw upon. Now, again, sometimes you can't boil the ocean. So, if you're really in trouble there, then I would say you start setting priorities. So I would do, the old Pareto's law, 80-20 rule, right? Take the 20% of your products that provide 80% of your business, and I would start ensuring those bills are cleaned up first. Then I would also look at your top 10 or 20 customers, top 10 or 20 suppliers, and look at their data and start working on it. Again, not trying to eat the elephant in one bite, but prioritizing based upon where the most volume is. But it's absolutely essential that these systems require, a good foundation of data accuracy. So I can't emphasize that enough.
Okay, great. And we're heading right up to the, I guess, on Pacific time, 11 o'clock hour. One more question. I think it's kind of it's a quantitative type question, Frank, but it's on the how much to spend on the budget for process and training and stuff for people in process. The question is, across your research, have you found what percentages are common for budgeting above your project to take care of the people and process type challenges that are out there? Do you find there is a percentage of how much additional in the budget you should be looking at? We haven't surveyed specifically on that. It's an excellent. I'm going to write this down and consider that for the next survey because so I don't have a guideline, and I suppose it depends upon if this is your first supply chain investment. It's probably going to be a higher percent. If it's a follow-on investment, it's probably going to be more moderate. But I would say you're probably safe. Whatever you think it is, to double it. You can't really spend too much on education and training and the people side of this because, as we all know, people is what makes system implementation successful. I very occasionally, but very rarely see these projects fail because they have, sometimes they have the wrong software, but rarely that there are technical problems with the software. It's more often the organization and people side that falls down here. So if you're going to exceed your budget in one place, be willing to exceed it or over budget for it, as I said, in process work and in people, education, training, and professional development. I don't think you can go wrong there. Okay, great. So we are right up against the 11 o'clock hour for Pacific. So Frank, I'd just like to thank you extremely very much for your time and for your research. And I would encourage everyone to read the full research report. It is some very interesting, fascinating type data. And as well to all the attendees, I'd like to thank you for your time today. There is a sort of a way to go and look at this webinar, as well as get the slides and the information. You see the website up there. And we encourage you to go to that website and grab the information. And once again, I'd like to thank everyone for their time today for this webinar. Thank you very much.